A Marine found his war dog chained. What he did next shocked the world. The late summer sun cast long shadows across the plains of Western America, painting the fields in hues of gold and amber. It was a landscape of quiet stillness, a far cry from the chaos Luke Dawson had known for years in the war zones of the Middle East. Stepping out of his rusted pickup truck, the dry earth crunching beneath his worn boots, Luke inhaled the scent of hay and something else. Something unsettling, something that didn't belong. 8 years. 8 years since he last stood on this land, his family's ranch, his childhood sanctuary. Now he was home, but the war had followed him, etched into the lines of his face, the stoop of his shoulders, the hollowness in his eyes. The youthful vibrancy that once defined him had been replaced by a battle-hardened weariness, a quiet resignation born of witnessing too much brutality, of feeling too deeply the sting of loss. Diagnosed with chronic back pain and PTSD, Luke had left the Marines, not with fanfare and celebration, but with the quiet understanding that he was no longer fit for duty. The memories were too vivid, the trauma too profound. But there was one thing, one being, that had kept his spirit from completely shattering. Bolt. Bolt, a Belgian Malinois, wasn't just a military working dog. He was Luke's comrade, his confidant, his lifeline in the hellish landscapes of war. They had fought side by side, slept under the same star-dusted skies, and on one harrowing occasion, Bolt had dragged Luke through a hail of bullets, saving his life when shrapnel had torn through his leg. Bolt was family, a fellow soldier Luke trusted implicitly, a bond forged in the crucible of combat. When Luke received his medical discharge, he assumed Bolt would either be retired or reassigned to another handler. But as weeks turned into months with no word of Bolt's whereabouts, a gnawing anxiety began to consume him. He made calls, contacted former commanding officers, navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of base command. The initial responses were vague, evasive. "We'll look into it," or "let me check with logistics." And finally, a former handler let slip that Bolt had been temporarily transferred to a private canine training facility. Temporary. The word hung in the air, laden with uncertainty. What did that even mean? Luke didn't wait for answers. He became a man possessed, fueled by a desperate need to find his friend. He traced the name of the training facility to a shell corporation, followed fragmented online threads buried deep in veteran forums, and made dozens of calls, each leading to a dead end. Until finally a name was mentioned, a place on the outskirts of a mid-sized city, tucked into a stretch of neglected land behind a shuttered industrial park. That's where Luke found himself now, standing on the edge of forgotten property, a wasteland of tall grass, rusting metal, and broken promises. Climbing over a sagging wire fence, he moved cautiously through the debris, his senses on high alert, the weight of his duffel bag a pale comparison to the weight in his heart. And then he saw it. At the back of the property, behind a rusted-out container half covered in vines, there was movement. A chain rattled, a sound that reverberated through Luke's very bones. He froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. A shape curled in the dirt, skeletal, still. Fur missing in patches, revealing ribs that jutted out like a grotesque anatomy lesson. Flies buzzed around open sores, a testament to neglect and suffering. "Bolt?" Luke whispered, his voice barely a breath. The figure didn't stir. Luke rushed forward, his breath catching in his throat. The dog's eyes, cloudy and unfocused, blinked once, then again. But there was no spark of recognition, no joyful bark, no wagging tail, only silence and stillness. He dropped to his knees, his voice thick with emotion. "Bolt, it's me, it's Luke." Still nothing. Then he remembered. He whispered the German command they had practiced endlessly, the one Bolt always responded to without hesitation. "Sits." A pause. Bolt's ears twitched. The dog lifted his head slowly as if waking from a nightmare and stared at Luke. The tail moved just once, a low, broken whimper escaping from Bolt's throat. Luke broke. Years of suppressed grief, of bottled-up pain, of unspoken guilt erupted in a torrent of tears. He wrapped his arms around the fragile body, his tears falling onto the matted fur. "I'm here now, buddy," he sobbed. "You're not alone anymore." The waiting room of the rural veterinary clinic was a sterile contrast to the desolate landscape Luke had just left. The hum of fluorescent lights and the soft, labored breathing of the dog lying on the cold steel table filled the silence. Luke sat on the edge of a cracked vinyl chair, his fists clenched, his gaze fixed on the vet as she examined Bolt with clinical urgency. Dr. Hernandez, a woman in her late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a history of volunteer work with overseas rescue teams, gently lifted Bolt's paw and sighed. "He's severely malnourished," she said, shaking her head. "His weight is dangerously low. He has multiple skin infections, likely from prolonged exposure and neglect. And these scars—" She paused, pointing to marks on Bolt's legs and sides. "These weren't caused by environment alone. Some of them look intentional." Luke felt his jaw tighten, his knuckles whitening. "Are you saying he was abused?" "I can't say for certain who did it, but yes," she replied grimly. "This dog has been through hell." Luke sat in silence, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He stared at Bolt, willing him to open his eyes, to acknowledge his presence. The dog's eyes followed him weakly, and for a fleeting moment Luke saw a flicker, a spark of recognition growing within the depths of those weary orbs. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. When he left the clinic, Luke carried more than just Bolt's fragile body in his truck. He carried a burning rage, a righteous fury that threatened to consume him. That night, under the soft hum of a single kitchen light, he opened his laptop. He uploaded a photo he had taken just before they left the container lot, a haunting image of Bolt lying on a threadbare blanket, his eyes sunken, his bones protruding beneath filthy fur. And beside it, he wrote, "He fought for this country, and this is how he was treated." He hit post and closed the laptop, the image of Bolt's suffering seared into his memory. He couldn't sleep, couldn't rest until he brought those responsible to justice. Within hours, the post began to gain traction. Shares turned to hundreds, then thousands. Comments flooded in, a tidal wave of shock and outrage. By morning, Bolt's story had gone viral. Former Marines, Army vets, and canine handlers poured into the comment section, sharing their heartbreak and their fury.
Unacceptable, he's a hero.
Where's the accountability? A retired Air Force officer wrote, "No warrior, human or canine, should end up like this." The wave only grew. Major news outlets picked up the story. Celebrities known for animal advocacy, actors, musicians, and influencers retweeted the post with their own messages of support. Animal rights groups issued official statements demanding a federal investigation into the treatment of retired military working dogs. Luke's inbox exploded with messages of support and offers of help. Journalists called, veterans reached out, strangers offered donations for Bolt's care. Then the doorbell rang. A local TV reporter stood on the porch, camera crew in tow. They had driven hours to find Luke's remote home. "Do you have a few minutes to talk?" he asked, his voice soft, almost reverent. The interview took place under the old oak tree out back, where Bolt lay wrapped in a blanket, his head resting in Luke's lap. "He saved my life more than once," Luke told the camera, his voice steady but low. "He dragged me out of a firefight after I took shrapnel in my leg. He stood between me and an IED. He never hesitated, never once. Now it's my turn to save his." By the time the segment aired that evening, Bolt's story wasn't just a viral post anymore, it was a national conversation. People were no longer just fighting for one dog. They were fighting for all the forgotten heroes, the four-legged warriors who served without question and were discarded without thanks. The story of Luke and Bolt had become something bigger, a symbol, a reckoning, a long overdue demand for justice for the silent, loyal souls who had given everything and received so little in return. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet battles and small, miraculous victories. Luke transformed his modest country home into a sanctuary for recovery. He cleared out the guest room and filled it with soft bedding, medical supplies, and a constant stream of sunlight. Every morning he prepared fresh meals for Bolt, small portions at first, careful not to overload his frail system. He administered antibiotics, applied salves for the sores, and sat beside Bolt during every vet follow-up, never once letting him out of sight. Bolt, in those early days, barely moved. His body, starved and betrayed, took time to trust again. But Luke was patient, unwavering in his commitment. He spoke to him constantly, sometimes about nothing at all, memories from the field, stories of their time in Kuwait and Syria, the nights they spent in the dirt, watching the stars through goggles. Other times, he just read aloud from old books or hummed quietly as he brushed the filth from Bolt's matted fur. And then one morning, Bolt finished an entire bowl of food. A week later, he stood on shaky legs and walked to the door on his own. By the end of the second month, he greeted Luke with a faint tail wag every time he came into the room. Each tiny step felt like a triumph, a testament to the power of love and perseverance. Soon they began walking together again, slow strolls along the edge of a nearby lake, the breeze soft against their faces. Luke found himself talking more on those walks, not just to Bolt, but to himself. For the first time in years, he felt like someone was truly listening, someone who understood the burdens he carried. The nightmares didn't vanish, but they changed. They came less frequently, and when they did, there was always a presence beside him. He could feel the weight of Bolt at the foot of the bed, the steady rhythm of his breathing like a heartbeat, anchoring him back to reality. Bolt had changed too. Though his body still bore the scars, his spirit rekindled. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, now shone with a guarded warmth. He hadn't forgotten his training. He still responded instantly to German commands, his ears perking at Platz or Blieb. But there was no aggression left in him, just loyalty, calm, fierce loyalty. He no longer lived to fight. He lived to protect. And the only thing he wanted to protect now was Luke. One night, long after the world had gone still, a storm rolled in over the plains. Lightning flashed in the distance, shadows danced across the walls, and something stirred inside Luke, a memory, a sound, a ghost from Kandahar or Fallujah. He shot up in bed, sweat soaking his back, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat of panic. He couldn't breathe, his hands trembled. Then he felt it, a paw, gentle, insistent. Bolt had jumped onto the bed and was nudging Luke's chest with quiet urgency, whining softly as he pressed closer, his warm eyes staring into Luke's, searching, anchoring. Luke wrapped his arms around him, burying his face into Bolt's thickening fur, and the sobs came, hard and fast. "It's okay, boy," he whispered through the tears. "We're home now. We're safe." The storm passed outside and within. That night, Luke slept soundly. Bolt curled beside him, no longer a soldier, no longer a ghost, but two survivors who had saved each other in different ways. It was a calm, breezy Saturday afternoon, the kind where small-town life felt almost like a warm blanket. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional hum of a pickup truck or the laughter of children riding their bikes along the sidewalks. Luke and Bolt were out for their weekly routine, a quick stop at the local convenience store to grab a bag of coffee and a pack of jerky for the ride back. Luke parked under the shade of an old oak in front of the store. Bolt, now a picture of renewed strength and quiet confidence, sat comfortably in the passenger seat. His coat had grown back thick and healthy, and the sharpness had returned to his amber eyes. He watched Luke with relaxed attentiveness as the Marine gave him a soft pat on the head. "Be right back, buddy." Luke walked inside, smiling at the cashier as he headed for the back of the store. The bell above the door chimed again behind him. What no one noticed at first was the man who entered right after. A stranger with a hoodie pulled low over his face and a nervous energy clinging to him like smoke. But Bolt noticed. In the truck, Bolt's ears perked up. He sat up straighter, his nose twitched. Then he heard it. Screams, glass shattering, and a child crying inside the store. Chaos erupted. The man had pulled a pistol from his waistband and shouted at the customers to get on the floor. In panic, he grabbed the nearest person, a little girl no older than 7, and dragged her toward the counter, pressing the gun to her temple with shaking hands. Luke, his heart hammering, stood frozen near the drinks aisle. He didn't move, didn't blink, trying to calculate his options, but he didn't have to, because Bolt already had. The truck door clicked open. The leash, unbuckled and wrapped around the handle, slid free as Bolt pushed the door open with his snout and jumped out silently onto the pavement. No barking, no growl, just purpose. He crept toward the door, low and fast, every muscle moving with precision honed over years of combat training. Inside, the girl was sobbing, the gunman shouting something incoherent, the cashier crouched behind the register, dialing 911 with trembling hands. Bolt slipped inside unnoticed, weaving between overturned chairs and snack displays. Luke caught the glint of his eyes just a second before it happened. In a flash, Bolt launched, his jaws locked onto the man's arm from behind, the force sending the gun flying. The man shrieked and fell backward, releasing the girl as Bolt dragged him down with astonishing control. No mauling, no excess force, just the perfect takedown. The girl bolted into Luke's arms, sobbing. Luke held her close as the store fell into stunned silence. By the time the police arrived, Bolt was sitting calmly beside the subdued assailant, his tail gently wagging, as if asking, "Did I do good, Dad?" "Word," spread faster than wildfire. The security footage was aired that evening on the local news, then picked up by national outlets. Reporters showed the moment, a streak of tan fur, saving a child with surgical precision. People couldn't believe it. The silent hero, they called him. Bolt became a symbol once more, not of tragedy or suffering, but of what resilience, love and loyalty could become when given a second chance. Luke stood before the cameras the next day, one hand resting gently on Bolt's head. "He didn't just survive," Luke said softly. "He remembered who he was, what he was meant to do. He was born to protect, and he still chooses to do it every day." And in that quiet little town, under that big American sky, a war dog once forgotten found not only a home but a legacy. The invitation arrived in a crisp white envelope, stamped with a gold insignia and embossed lettering that made Luke pause before opening it. Inside was a letter, formal, respectful, and humbling. He had been asked to speak at the National War Dog Memorial Ceremony in Washington, D.C., a tribute to the lives and service of military canines. For the first time, a section of the memorial would be dedicated to forgotten and abandoned war dogs, those who had served and been left behind. Bolt's story had become the heartbeat of that movement. Luke stood on the stage before thousands, veterans, families, soldiers in uniform, children with miniature flags, faces young and old, all turned towards him. Bolt lay at his feet, calm and regal, a vest adorned with medals resting lightly over his aging shoulders. Luke took a deep breath, looked down at his companion, and began. "I was told war would change me, and it did, but not the way I expected. I came home carrying ghosts, and I thought I was alone, until I realized Bolt was carrying them too." He didn't speak of the horrors they had witnessed, the battles they had fought. He didn't need to. Every scar on Bolt's body told a story of loyalty, courage, and survival. "War didn't break him," Luke continued. "We did. We turned our backs on him, we forgot him, but love brought him back." The crowd was silent. Some wiped away tears, others simply nodded, as if they finally understood something that had been unspoken for far too long. "It's our turn to do better," Luke concluded. "We owe them our respect, our gratitude, and our unwavering commitment to ensure that no war dog is ever forgotten again." In the months that followed, Luke put his words into action. With the help of supporters, veterans, and animal advocates from across the country, he founded a non-profit organization, Bolt's Second Mission. The mission was clear: to find and rehabilitate retired military working dogs who had been lost in the shuffle, abandoned, or forgotten. The organization also provided therapy programs, pairing veterans with these dogs, creating a healing bond for both soldier and canine. Stories began pouring in. Dogs left in shelters, others kept in cages by private contractors, some simply unaccounted for. Luke and his team tracked them down one by one, offering them not just shelter, but a second chance. Bolt became the face of the mission, his photo a symbol of resilience, his story a call to compassion. Years passed. Seasons came and went over the quiet western plains. And then, one early morning, just as the sky began to blush with the colors of dawn, Luke found himself once again by the lake, the same lake where he and Bolt had taken so many walks. The water was still, the air crisp. Bolt lay beside him, his once powerful frame now softened by age. His muzzle had turned silver, and his eyes were clouded with time, but they still held that quiet fire. Next to Bolt sat a new presence, a young German shepherd, recently rescued from a failed private kennel in the south. Skittish, unsure, but curious, he leaned slightly into Bolt, watching every movement with reverence. Luke smiled and looked at them both. "He'll show you the way," he whispered to the young dog, gently patting Bolt's side. "Just like he showed me." Bolt stirred slightly, then rested his head on Luke's leg. The warmth of the sunrise poured over them, painting their shadows across the grass. In that moment there was no war, no pain, no memory of chains or cages, only peace, only love, only legacy. Some stories stay with us not because they're loud, but because they speak to the quiet corners of the heart. Luke and Bolt's journey is one of love, loyalty, and second chances. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, healing is possible, and that sometimes the ones we save are the ones who save us right back. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Amazing Paws Stories, where the silent heroes, the forgotten warriors, and the most loyal companions finally get the voice they deserve. Until the next story, stay kind, stay compassionate, and always believe in second chances.